Warning. This episode contains material not suitable for all ages. Discussions of child sacrifice, cannibalism, blood, sexual themes, and disturbing rituals are contained in this episode. Listener caution is advised.
We in America are misinformed.
He kills babies, though.
Nothing. You understand nothing. I'll show you.
And then a sacrifice would happen.
The sacrifice? Were these animal sacrifices?
Animals and people.
But yes, we do consume each other's blood on occasion for ritual purposes only.
And in telling the truth to the masses, but you know, the masses have a hard time believing anything.
And we need to be clear, shamelessness is not and will never be a superpower.
Babies and he eats the meat.
It is the mark of a villain. Kidnapping children is not what great nations do.
Welcome to Rebel Road and our first check engine episode. I'm Mary.
I'm Haley. Hello, and welcome to a new type of episode, our first check engine episode. We will be back next week with our regular episode. Don't worry, the mummies aren't going anywhere, so we will get to that. But you know, Mary, when you're driving along and everything seems fine, and then all of a sudden your dashboard lights up, you start hearing the weird noises, and then, your heart just drops, and it's like, what the heck? And that's when the check engine light comes on, really out of nowhere. Does that sound relatable?
Absolutely.
Well, if you think about it, with the news and certain horrific events coming to light, we thought we should take a deeper look, especially into that topic, because it might be on everyone's minds. Now, again, this is not your normal episode. This is a heavier episode, and Mary and I have been going back and forth on what we could talk about, and really at the end of our discussions, we landed on blood rituals and what are they exactly. We're not going to get into super specifics. You're not going to learn how to summon anything, but we are going to touch on a lot today. So as this is the Rebel Road podcast, go ahead and buckle up. Blood rituals, they span blood magic, blood pacts, sacrifice, cannibalism, and believe it or not, science, and even more. And once again, before we start, we will be discussing murder, cannibalism, rituals involving children and infants, violence, blood, and just a lot of uneasy topics. So please listen at your own discretion. So, Mary, let's get into it. I think most of the modern world doesn't believe there is any real power in shedding blood. I mean, beyond a superficial feeling of power or, a rush that a murderer might say they get from killing a victim. I myself have never even thought about pulling or gaining power from blood. It's just not something you think about, at least not me.
Well, who does, Haley? I mean, I agree. Most of the population doesn't go around thinking about blood rituals and hopefully not blood sacrifices. I think it's just one of those things that's off our radar in this world, or it was. No one thought or talked about them. And if they did, immediately you would think it was made up or a discussion about an ancient civilization. Maybe it was an article you read or movie or some witchcraft stuff. And then it would just kind of slide right off you and you'd go about your day. Very rarely would anyone talk about a blood ritual and it would stick with them. But the reality is blood rituals are all around us and even more disturbing than we know.
Right? But I think we need to educate everyone about blood. I mean, what is it? We all know, sort of, but let's start with a little science about blood. An adult human holds about 10.5 liters of blood. Women a little less, and then men sometimes a little bit more. But on average, it's 10.5 liters. So that is a little under 3 gallons. And if you want to be, exact, it's 2.77777. Okay. But imagine 3 gallons of milk. And that little amount of liquid is what keeps us alive. Now, in contrast, a newborn human baby only has about 1 cup of blood, okay, which is not a lot, very precious there. Our blood is 55% plasma and 45% formed elements, but the plasma is 92% water, 7% proteins, and 1% of nutrients and salt. And those formed elements, that's our red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. You know, this is just a simple breakdown. The science of blood is utterly fascinating, but we're going to keep it simple for today's episode. So, what does blood do in our body? It's so much more than just keeping us alive. It does everything. It regulates our temperatures, like when we have a fever, and that's because our blood heats up. The blood delivers oxygen to our organs and cells. It carries hormones and nutrients. It cleans up waste like carbon dioxide. It fights off infections, and it's responsible for repairing injuries in our body. And fun fact, our blood contains gold along with copper, iron, zinc, and trace minerals. So, Mary, if someone ever says you're golden, you really are.
I love that so much. So, what happens when we lose our blood? Let's look at that. Our blood pressure decreases, we get dizzy, we get weak, pale, cold skin, clammy a little bit. Our tissues and organs receive less oxygen, and that leads to confusion, rapid breathing, and potential organ failure, and in severe cases, loss of consciousness and death. 2 liters, Haley. 2 liters of blood loss. That's all it takes. And without treatment, that 2 liters is considered fatal. And it can take up to 8 weeks to replace just 1 pint of blood loss. So if you donate blood, Haley, do you donate blood?
I do not. I have small rubbery veins, and I've been advised never to donate blood.
Oh, jeez. Well, good to know. And I used to donate blood all the time, or I used to always try, and I was always anemic. It was crazy. But I volunteered and ran a local blood drive for a long time. But anyway, when you donate blood, they take 1 pint of your blood during donation. And there are 2.1183 pints in just 1 liter. So when you donate that 1 pint of blood, it can take you up to 8 weeks to replace it. And that might not seem like much, but really it is. Red blood cells live for about 120 days, and then they're recycled and reused in our bone marrow. And that makes our new red blood cells. Our amazing body produces about 2 million new red blood cells every second to replace the old ones, keeping our total blood count inside of our bodies stable. And the iron in our blood, that's what gives it that red color, that metallic taste, or that smell. Crime scene techs and detectives, they kind of all learn that sickly sweet smell of blood. But this iron binds with the oxygen we breathe in, and that is what allows our blood to carry the oxygen all around our cells and organs. One tiny blood cell can capture 1 billion molecules of oxygen. It's really amazing. Now, too many red blood cells in our system makes the blood too thick, and that makes it hard for the heart to pump. And then on the opposite side, too few blood cells leads to oxygen deprivation, and both of those are very serious issues.
If our curious friends are listening and wondering what the heck are they getting at, just stick with us. There's actual science behind some blood rituals, and we want you to see The value in blood. It's not some mystical woo woo spiritual trade. Blood is literally life and has some crazy organic uses. The Bible made that clear before science came along. The Bible says the life of the flesh is in the blood, and it literally is. Blood is what keeps our bodies alive. The medical community has been trying to find a replacement for blood, an artificial source, but until recently, and I mean last year recently, they have been unable to do that. In Japan, they recently announced a synthetic blood alternative that is, and this makes me queasy. It's shelf stable at room temperature for up to 2 years or 5 years if it's refrigerated. They took old hemoglobin from donated blood, the blood you donate. It expires in 42 days if that's not used. They can't transfuse it. So they took this hemoglobin and made something called hemoglobin vesicles. Now, this stuff is a pale purple pink shade. It's very odd. And they claim to have tested it on humans with very little side effects and hope to have it available by 2030. And they aren't the only ones. Erythromer is a freeze dried blood. It's also made from old hemoglobin, and they just add water. Now, erythromer is primarily intended to act as a bridge to care during the golden hour for trauma victims when or where natural blood is unavailable. And this has been tested on animals. It's awaiting human trials, but it's also stored at room temperature and has a longer potential shelf life.
That is so wild, Haley. I didn't know about fake blood. I knew that sometimes they would use saline to be like a blood filler, but I didn't know they actually had come up with something. I thought they were still unable to solve that oxygen delivery capability. I mean, I understand the medical world wanting to have it for trauma and surgeries because, blood is life, end of story. But the substitute blood, that kind of makes me think of that movie Daybreakers. Have you seen it? Where the vampires are running the world and they've drained most of humankind, and so now they're forced to drink this synthetic blood, and it's a poor substitute. I don't know why, but that just made me think of that movie.
Well, vampires and blood, of course, have that long history, that parasitic exchange of life force, exchanging blood for power and immortality, right? With the act of drinking blood, we immediately think of vampires. I think most people do. But it goes much broader than that. If you think about it, even what we learned in history class, warriors and hunters, they used to drink the blood of their kills. I don't know. I don't hunt, but I think some may still do that today. And this was to absorb their enemy's strength. And it could be human blood or it could be animal blood. They would also mark their faces with the blood of their kills. Now, drinking blood is also practiced in the occult world for various ceremonies. And drinking blood is centered on harnessing life force, gaining power, and forging spiritual bonds. Blood is used as a potent offering to spirits, deities, or demons to gain their favor and to forge those strong connections. Mortals trade this blood for favors, and some practitioners believe that it serves as a key to access the spirit realm. Now, drinking blood, it then becomes an offering to nourish the deities or spirits, and it really becomes this twisted form of communion between the two. Now, the consumption of blood has been linked to the desire for immortality or transcendence of human limitations, and that links back to our vampires. The quantity of human or animal blood consumed in a blood ritual is highly variable, and it depends entirely on the specific practices of the individuals or the groups involved. It really ranges from a few drops or sips to potentially several ounces or more of blood. And there are celebrities that have even admitted to doing this, drinking a few drops of their own blood and that of their partners. And Mary, I think we have a little clip here of a celebrity admitting to doing this.
Yeah, let's play it.
I guess to drink each other's blood might mislead people, or like people are imagining us with like goblets and we're like Game of Thrones drinking each other's blood. It's just a few drops, but yes, we do consume each other's blood on occasion for ritual purposes only. It is used for a reason, and it is controlled where it's like, let's shed a few drops of blood and each drink it. He's much more haphazard and hectic and chaotic, where he's willing to just like cut his chest open with broken glass and be like, take my soul, let me bleed on you. It doesn't not happen, let me tell you. Maybe not exactly like that, but a version of that has happened many times.
And for those of you who don't know, that was Megan Fox, and I bet she wished she had never said that. But the blood you drink matters. If blood is currency in the spirit realm, then the younger, more innocent blood would be worth more. Remember, adults have 2.77 something of gallons of blood, and that newborn, it only has 1 cup. And so that is super precious. And blood from an unclean animal would be like an insult. There are specific rituals that demand different types of blood. And for most of this episode, though, we're going to be talking about human blood. If not, we'll make the distinction. But blood needs to be pure, and drinking your own blood in a ritual would be showing a deep commitment and a desire for personal connection, or to a specific deity or something unknown. You just never know what you're doing, so don't do it. Drinking the blood of a partner or a cult member, like we had in that clip there, would be to create a permanent bond or soul tie or a blood tie. And in blood magic, this is the hardest bond to undo.
I don't want to camp too long on the vampire angle, Mary, but there is a little science behind drinking blood for vitality and power. Now, the medical community will tell you there are absolutely no benefits from drinking human blood. Sanguinivorous is a term used for feeding off of blood like insects. It's derived from Latin sanguis, which means blood, and vorare, which means to devour. And hopefully I pronounced those correctly. But believe it or not, there are people who practice medical sanguinivorous. And these people claim that drinking blood alleviates symptoms of conditions like depression, chronic fatigue, headaches, and stomach pain. Now, some people also believe that iron and protein content provides an energy boost or fulfill a psychological need, which I think is kind of odd. Historically, as far back as medieval Europe and ancient Rome, blood was viewed as a restorative tonic, and they believed that it would cure inward diseases, restore strength, and really preserve youth. Ideas that evidently still persist today.
And drinking blood might not be seen as a form of blood doping, but I think it could be. Have you heard of blood doping, Haley?
Not until this episode, Mary. Never heard of blood doping.
Right, me either. But if you don't know what blood doping is the use of blood to increase the red blood cells to boost oxygen delivery to muscles, enhance endurance and performance. So increased strength. That kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? But beyond drinking the blood, the real form of blood doping, though, and it is illegal, by the way, but it includes blood transfusions of your own banked blood or those of a donor blood, and it also includes injections of EPO. Now, EPO, that is a hormone that we find in our kidneys. It's a natural hormone, and that stimulates our bone marrow to make more red blood cells. And so this would increase our red blood cells in our body. It creates energy. And Lance Armstrong admitted to blood doping, and he won 7 Tour de France's by blood doping. He had a whole team of doctors that helped him. So clearly it works. But remember, too many red blood cells can have adverse effects like heart attacks, blood clots, and strokes. The blood is too thick for the heart to pump. And we should also point out the risk of drinking blood. Both human and animal blood can carry dangerous pathogens that are transmitted through ingestion. And those risks include contacting bloodborne diseases and viruses such as hepatitis and even HIV. Blood is exceptionally rich in iron, and that is how we get all that oxygen. And the human body has difficulty eliminating excess iron. So, consuming large quantities of blood can lead to a buildup of toxic iron levels in the tissue and organs. And that's a condition that can cause severe damage to the heart, liver, pancreas, and it can even be fatal over time.
Basically, for our listeners, don't drink blood, kids, right?
Absolutely.
And Mary, another thought here while you were speaking and talking about the risk of heart attacks and blood clots and strokes, think about the number of folks that are in that elite category that have died from something like a heart attack, blood clot, stroke, etc. That might be a rabbit hole for us to go down later.
Oh, yeah.
But
I never even thought about that. Absolutely.
yeah. Our listeners might be thinking, now, this is just some strange science. This is not woo woo blood rituals. But remember, any use of blood for a personal gain, it would fall under the category of a blood ritual. Maybe not a medical procedure that's going to be used to save your life due to trauma, but the intentional use of blood to advance yourself for youth or gain, like winning a Tour de France, that is a blood ritual. Even if it's not a sacrifice to a spirit or a god, you are kind of making yourself a god in a way. Now, blood doping is just a small drop in the intentional use of blood and science to really advance yourself. Let's talk about youth from vampire facials and Mary, yeah, those are real things. Have you
What
heard of
are
a vamp?
those? I'm not up on that kind of stuff. I don't even
Okay.
use like lotions on my face.
Well, we're getting old, Mary. You need to start using that stuff. But
I'm Asian,
anyways,
I'm Asian hard over here.
a vampire facial, basically a blood sample's taken. It's spun in a centrifuge to separate out the plasma. And then the plasma is applied to your face through microneedling. Now, this procedure, it costs around 1,000 to maybe 2,500 US dollars for every session. They're very popular. Now,
Wow. Hold on. So they take your blood, spin it around, and then with needles, like punch it back into your face.
yes, that's
That
exactly what they do.
that sounds horrible. But okay, go
Well,
on.
people are paying big money for it, but
I know,
you know,
I know, but it sounds horrible.
very popular. Now, the vitality of youth links to blood science like crazy. It's crazy. Let me tell you about Ambrosia Medical. It was founded by Jesse Karmazin. This medical company provided plasma transfusions from young donors, and I think the donors were aged like 16 to 25 years old, or so they claim, right? And they marketed this to the rich. And these treatments were aimed at individuals 30 years and older, with many patients in their 60s to help combat that aging. We're not there yet, but the rich elite in the 60s, they're not liking the way they're looking. But the cost for these procedures, these were anywhere from $8,000 for 1 liter of blood to $12,000 for 2 liters of blood. And they claimed it was to reverse aging, improve memory, boost energy, and really treat conditions like Alzheimer's, heart disease, and Parkinson's. Now, some of the recipients reported feeling amazing or rejuvenated. It was driven by animal studies showing cognitive and physical improvements.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard of this company and they shut that down fairly recently. It was shut down in 2019. The FDA came in and said, no, there's no evidence, pack it up. Well, we all know that when a three-letter agency comes in, it is for our safety and our benefit. But the cost of this service was just insane. And I mean, clearly it catered to the wealthy, the vain, and people who sadly were afraid of dying from these terrible aging diseases. But you're right, Haley. This ideal of young blood to reverse aging and diseases of aging and death is not a new one. It's been practiced in rituals and blood magics as far back as ancient Egypt. That's as far as we can trace that. But it's even more so in modern times. It's just been rebranded as science and pushed into the light, sort of. Did you hear that story of Brian Johnson, that billionaire who was in pursuit of keeping his biological age at just 18?
Yes. There was a show on Netflix about him, a little documentary. He's the one that did plasma transfusions from his teenage son, but he said that he stopped doing them, but there was no proof.
Right. And you can find that all over the place. And in 2023, he announced that he was no longer going to be doing them. His whole thing was transparency, and he said there was no proof. But I found a news story that claimed that Johnson had stated he had been able to halt his aging by 24%. Now, he's very wealthy. He eats right, he has the strict regimen, and the article never claimed that it was due to the plasma transfers. But that Fox article was all about the plasma transfers. So, kind of read between the lines there. So, could there have been so much backlash to him that he was doing it that he dismissed it and then he just does it privately? Or do we think that he really did stop doing them? The clients from the Ambrosia company, from what little I could find on them, they were satisfied. They loved those transfusions. So, there are still to this day, right now, biotech companies that are looking into the science of the plasma transfusions to reverse aging. Elevian is one such company, and it is working to this day with their GDF-11 project. Now, back to Johnson. He claims he didn't get into the plasma transfusions for the anti-aging benefits, but because his father had been showing signs of dementia. So, in addition to getting plasma from his son, he himself would give his plasma to his father. And I just wanted to mention that because clearly he was trying to do something to stop aging and to help his father. But the scientific uses behind young blood, if you can figure it out, would be vastly beneficial. And let's think about the darkness of man. If what everyone, these rich elites were doing, and people found out, I fear that people in desperation would potentially begin killing others for the lifeblood it gives. So, that by itself would be a good reason to shut anything down. Don't you think, Haley?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially controlling the information. And I want to point out that people, they weren't just like, I wonder if this will work. There have been so many studies with mice and rats and other animals that proved blood from a younger animal given to the elder animal does reverse aging and aging diseases. But the younger mice who were subjected to this parabiosis experienced rapid aging, while the older were rejuvenated.
Right, a little Franken-science going on there. And parabiosis, for those who don't know what that is, Haley, would you explain that?
Yeah, parabiosis is it's more aggressive than a transfusion. It is a surgical technique that ties the circulatory system of two animals together, so the younger to the older. And they didn't just transfuse the blood, they literally stitched them together, and that's just ghoulish if you think about it. And this is the kink in the science, parabiosis, how to get the full effect without that. and just with a transfusion. It is a crazy study, and there have been several people in the scientific community who are doing it. Our listeners can dig into that a little more on their own. And it does circle back to vampires and drinking blood to stay young and to increase physical strength and health with the end goal of immortality.
But rebranded nicely with science.
Yes, absolutely. There it is. And all of these companies and studies, they're just trying to replicate what is known in the dark occult world, trying to legitimize blood rituals without calling them that. There is always a price to pay. And with blood, absolutely. I want to bring this around to a bigger topic, and that is young blood and the super wealthy, or like earlier, I referred to them as the elite. And I know we hate calling them that. I know you, Mary, call them parasites, but in our episode, we're going to refer to them as the elite or even global elite, because if we say that, our audience kind of immediately has an idea of who they are and who we are referring to. But let's talk about adrenochrome and blood rituals around adrenochrome. Adrenochrome is the chemical produced in the blood, and it's found by terrorizing children. And it is said they take and harvest this blood and either drink it or inject it into themselves to stay healthy and young. Now, let's sit on this for a little while here and follow this dark rabbit hole. Almost 500,000 kids go missing every year from the United States alone. Now, many are resolved, but many are never solved. And if you think about it, folks, where are the kids going? I realize, and I know those of you listening are starting to realize most are trafficked, which is disgusting. But how many are taken for blood rituals? Where are they getting these kids? And are they being tortured and used for nefarious reasons?
Yeah. Well, if you've been paying attention, there is obviously an underground source, just a vast network, and they come from all over the world. That's run by some shadow cabal, reptilian, if you believe in that, or it's just a global conspiracy. And they profit off the blood of the terrified, stolen children of our world.
These organizations, whoever they are, I think they protect each other. And we are seeing that play out in real time right before our eyes with the Epstein files. A few may go down, a few, but that network will remain. The rich, powerful people all around the globe in those files. And if we believe some of the emails, they are doing dark, dark things to our children. And I'm not sure where I heard this. I think maybe another podcast, but somewhere in the Baltic states, there are farms. And I just had to pause there because that's disgusting. There are farms where children are chained and tortured, and then their blood is drained. Now, is that true? I don't know. We don't want to spread misinformation, but would we put it past them? In recent light of the Epstein files, we've been shown a tiny glimpse into how the elite think, and nothing is really beyond them at this point.
Haley, you're always saying how they like to show us what they're doing. And if that is true, then we can look at some horrifying movies here. There's this movie called Hostel, and I watched it because I didn't really know what it was. And I will never watch another thing like it. So out there, don't watch it if you haven't seen it. Don't. It's dark. But the summary is they're in some isolated country, and these men kidnap young, beautiful girls that are just backpacking through the country. And wealthy people, mostly men, pay to do whatever they want to them. And I mean, whatever. They torture, they murder, they mangle. It's just a horrid movie. But again, do not watch it. And even if we jump to a lighter movie, let's say Monsters Inc., and this one makes me sad because I love that movie. But if you think about harvesting adrenochrome and then you think about the overlay on that movie, it becomes so dark. Monsters scaring children on purpose to harvest their fear, and that fear is what powers their world. Super dark stuff.
Yeah, I think we talked about Monsters Inc. in one of our other episodes, and it also makes me sad. One of my most favorite movies that I watched with the kids growing up. But just think about what they claim adrenochrome does. It keeps them young and vital. So they just keep running the world. That's what gives them the ability to just keep running the world. I really do think everything is just a big deception. And at the heart of it is blood. I mean, look at Hollywood. If you just look at celebrities, they're not seeming to age. And you can say plastic surgery, but realistically, people who you know, Mary, and I know who have gotten plastic surgery, just normal people, even with plastic surgery, you still age at some point, right? But the people in Hollywood, no. I mean, come on. Some of them almost are like reverse aging. I don't really like the Kardashians, but we'll talk about the mom of the Kardashians. Uh, that's a wild one if you've not checked that out. That's way out there. It's getting wild all across the board. And with every new conspiracy and proof, it gets wilder.
Yeah, some entertainers absolutely appear to be aging in reverse. I agree with you. And Hollywood, adrenochrome, and the wealthy, wrap it all together. Now, I'm not sure that there's any type of ritual that's been mentioned in these released Epstein files, but they absolutely do allude to some disturbing themes, like the very real torture and terrorizing of children. Now, is this terror and torture of children that leads us back to adrenochrome? I mean, Haley, let's back it up again. What is the science behind adrenochrome? Is this some mythical, magical elixir, or is there some science behind it? Is it even real?
Yes, it is quite real. The scientific definition is the oxidation of adrenaline. And we know fear instantly releases adrenaline. Now, this compound, adrenochrome, is a derivative of adrenaline. And there is a vast interest in it due to its role in the study of mental health and neurochemistry. There's actually some researchers that have explored its effects on the human body, particularly its influence on mood and perception, and making it a subject of interest in the development of therapeutic agents. Now, adrenochrome's ability to interact with neurotransmitter systems, it positions it as a candidate for further exploration in psychiatric research and also potential treatments for mood disorders. I've heard claims that it's like a high like no other. But in addition to its research applications, adrenochrome has been investigated for its potential use in the cosmetic industry, particularly in formulations aimed at enhancing skin health and appearance. Mary, are you paying attention? Because I know you said earlier that you don't even use any face cream. But
I'm gonna skip the blood of a terrified child. Pass. Hard
good
pass.
good idea. But, back to this, its antioxidant properties, it may contribute to skin rejuvenation, making it an appealing ingredient for high end skincare products. Obviously, nothing that we're going to be able to afford. But as the scientific community continues to uncover the complexities of that compound, adrenochrome holds promise for innovative applications that could benefit both health and beauty sectors. And we know how much money goes into both of those sectors. Now, synthetic adrenochrome, it's cheap. It's not regulated, so you could buy it if you had scientific reasons. But one last thing, the chemical structure of adrenochrome, when rotated, it looks like a rabbit. And Mary, I told you we're going to go down a rabbit hole with this one.
Yeah, you did. And this one is deep within that conspiracy hole. While you described the scientific side, I found it interesting that you mentioned it holds applications in the beauty sectors. Adrenochrome is said to be the reason why our elites continue to look so young. Now, the rumors of how to harvest adrenochrome organically, that's messed up, and that harvesting ties into our blood rituals. Theories commonly state that a cabal of theistic Satanists rape and murder children and harvest adrenochrome from their victims' fear induced blood as a recreational drug or as an elixir of youth, similar to children's blood transfusions. That theory with the blood transfusions is that the young blood actually helps you to reverse age. Does that sound familiar? It's just like our medical companies and that billionaire we just talked about. So there is some scientific legitimacy to this practice.
So, what do we think they're doing, Mary? Are they drinking this blood or injecting it, or are they maybe even bathing in it?
I don't know, Haley. Pick one or all of the above. Either way, conspiracy or fact, it is child sacrifice. It is a blood ritual. Have you heard of Elizabeth Bathory? Have you heard about her?
I have not. Tell me
Okay.
about it.
Yeah. Well, Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary, which is now Slovakia, again, kind of in that Baltic region, tortured and murdered hundreds of young girls. Some counts say that it may have been as high as 600. And this was back in the 16th and 17th century. Her family, they controlled Transylvania. Vampires, anyone? Now, there are claims that she and Vlad the Impaler are related, but I couldn't find any information on that. But they do have ancestors that are both linked to the Order of the Dragon. And we may circle back on that or hit that in another episode. But back to Bathory. She evidently earned her nickname Countess Dracula or the Blood Countess, and it said she would torture her young servant girls by hanging them upside down above her bath, where she would bathe in their blood and drink it to retain her youth and vitality and to possibly treat her epilepsy that some claim she had. Now, she was convicted of her crimes and she was imprisoned in the castle of Cadiz, where she remained until her death in 1640.
So she literally bathed in the blood. I don't know, Mary. Is this a vampire episode or a blood ritual episode? And we keep circling back to vampires here. But when an episode is focused on blood, it's hard not to. And by looking at Bathory and Vlad, we are stepping into a peak of royalty and our global elites. When you think about the Windsor bloodline having ties back to the bloodline of Vlad the Impaler, it's not direct through male line of kings, but rather the maternal ancestry of Queen Elizabeth and King Charles. Just put that in your back pocket. Maybe our listeners can rabbit hole down that. A big side note there, but anyways, let's look at how desensitized we may be getting when it comes to blood rituals. I want to talk about Marina Abramovich and spirit cooking. This lady, this is a wild one. This lady is 79 years old and she does not look that. She's noted to be, and I'm going to say air quotes here, she's an artist. And in 1996, she did a project, and it's again, air quotes, book of recipes meant to be used for or to incite an emotional or physical reaction. And oddly, it reads in the book, with a sharp knife, cut deep into the middle finger of your left hand and eat the pain. Now, some of the ingredients call for fresh breast milk with fresh sperm milk to be consumed on earthquake nights, or another has fresh morning urine. Now, you can find a video on YouTube with her performing this, and we will link it in the show notes. It is disturbing and weird, and we're bringing all the weird today. We like to keep it weird. She has gallons and gallons of pig's blood and writes the recipes on a wall in the blood. And then in another room in a corner, it's this little clay looking doll shape, kind of like a small child. And she trenches that in the pig blood as well. Now, the blood is congealed and clotty. It's so disturbing. She lines the room in the blood, and then you see her in some weird outfit with a snake on her shoulders, and then there's some weird headrest for people to use before they view it. You put your forehead on it. It's just a whole lot of icky, gross, disturbing vibes.
Emphasis on the ick with this video. Now, I love art, but this is not art. I don't care who you are, what you're telling me. That is not art. And that's not even the Nazca people and their trophy head art, which was weird with a capital W. But we bring her up specifically, I think, because of all the fluids in her art rituals, whatever you want to call them. She has been called a Satanist, and I don't know if that's true. She denies that, but so many people deny it when they're called a Satanist. And if we're talking Satanist, for anyone who doesn't know, a Satanist is not a Luciferian. And they have wildly different views. And there are other darker sects of religions like Malachian. So you could not be a Satanist and still worship something quite dark that requires blood sacrifices and rituals. And, Abramovich, she's also known, you've probably seen the images of what looks like a dead body in a pool of blood and people are eating it. She's the one behind all those really disturbing dinner theme parties.
Yeah, we mentioned fluid swaps as a form of a blood ritual, but another form we didn't want to sidestep would be cannibalism. That in itself is a type of blood ritual and consumed for power or as part of the ritual. Do you know that cannibalism is illegal in only one state here in the United States? Just one, and that's Idaho.
That is so disturbing. Ugh. I mean, I know in California and I think New York, there were rumors of restaurants that actually served human meat. But if you Google that, Snopes, our lovely fact checker, he always says no. And we trust that, right? Sure, we do. But while researching those, I was trying to find those restaurants. I found a very alarming website. And I have no idea if it's real. I don't know if it's some gag thing, but it really kind of feels legit. And it is called thecannibalclub.com. I want all of our listeners to go and Google that and come back and let us know what you think about that website. Haley, you've looked at it. What do you think about it? It's weird, right?
Well, Mary, do you watch Bob's Burgers?
I love that show. And are you talking about that first episode?
Yes, I am. The conspiracy community loves that episode. It's this idea of the restaurant made me think of that. It's human flesh and hamburgers, and how about jerky? We now see that popping up in the horrible Epstein files. Jerky, and even jerky in evidence bags. Why would you put that in an evidence bag if it was just jerky? No, we all are thinking it. It's human flesh. Lady Gaga, who looks insane lately, which makes me sad. I actually really liked her way back in the day, but she wore that famous meat dress to the awards, and it was rumored that it was made from the flesh of children. And since we hit that dark note, let's talk about Rabbi Finkelstein and his recorded interview in 2006, where he claimed they drain children's blood to make Passover matzo bread. Let's listen to that clip.
Both of us have two totally different wants and needs and desires against one another, and yet here we are, sitting here tonight live on the Turner Radio Network, discoursing about people, discoursing about things, being honest and truthful, and telling the truth to the masses. But you know, the masses have a hard time believing anything. Well, we've done a great brainwashing job on them over the centuries, and especially the last few hundred years. We've just brainwashed them completely. They believe anything we tell them. And, you know, and I mean, we have a lot of fun around Passover where we steal the children. And, you know, I know you know because I've heard it on your show before. I mean, we steal 100 to 300,000 children a year just here in this country. And we drain their blood and we mix it with a Passover bread. And then we throw the bodies into the slaughterhouses that we own. And we grind up all the bodies in the sausage and the hamburger. McDonald's is one of our favorite outlets. And the people, they eat it for breakfast. They eat their children for lunch. And, you know, as Jews, you know, we gotta do what we do. The most important thing to remember between you, Pastor Wickstrom, and me, Rabbi A.B. Finkelstein of New York, that we both have two fathers, and so that's why we look at the world in two different ways.
Yeah, it's disturbing. And I haven't eaten at a McDonald's in years. And I did that long before I heard this. But wow, if what he said was true, and we aren't keeping score here, but then us conspiracy theorists, we're just ticking off the columns lately. But it feels like no one's listening. And we aren't saying McDonald's or any other fast food chain is doing this, but we're not saying they're doing this either.
Yeah, you know, Mary, you mentioned that you haven't eaten at a McDonald's in years, and McDonald's had a chokehold on me majority of my life. And I will say, up to it's almost been exactly a year ago, I have not had a McDonald's hamburger. And the reason I want to share this story, the reason I have not is because I was sitting there eating a McDonald's hamburger and I bit into it and something wasn't right. And I looked at it and I have no idea what was in that burger patty, but it did not look like it was supposed to be there. And it looked like a very odd piece of a body part. And I spit it out and I vowed to never eat another McDonald's hamburger again. And I grew up eating McDonald's. Like I said, it had a chokehold on me and I refuse ever to eat it again. It's almost like a personal experience based on all the conspiracy claims. But, you know, Mary, in the conspiracy community, and again, it's only a conspiracy until it's proven true. Now, if you do the math, there aren't even enough cows to serve that many hamburgers. I have seen the numbers also where it is possible. But again, if there are not, and if you look at the US beef market, the industry is down a whopping 75%. So beef supply is at an all time low. Now, if there are rumors of not enough beef, where is the meat coming from? And a more disturbing question, why would you feed it back to us?
Yeah, I don't know. And you're right, Haley. There's numbers that say there are enough cows that can produce this, but then if you look at the declining beef in the United States, 75% less. There's no way that there's enough beef. And I don't know why they would feed it back to us, but in instances where cannibalism is practiced, like Papua New Guinea, they have these rituals. And some tribes there believe that eating the wrong body part or eating a specific people would weaken the eater. Okay. So if they're feeding it back to us, maybe it's to try to weaken us. Eating human flesh is dangerous due to the high risk of contracting prions and other pathogens, which can cause severe long-term and fatal neurological and physical degeneration. Some religions even refuse blood transfusions because of Levitical law and the sacredness of blood. And it kind of makes sense. You don't know whose blood you're getting. And if that blood does bind you, do you want a stranger's blood? But back to the food, if you really want pure food, just grow your own, raise your own, and find a local farmer and just, find somebody.
I never thought about the blood transfusions. Like, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't even do organ transplants, do they?
I don't know if they do. I think back in the day they didn't allow it, and I think now it might be a personal decision. They kind of changed the rules over there a lot.
Yeah, well, a blood transfusion or drinking blood is a type of cannibalism. And that might creep people out. But back to actual flesh eating cannibalism, it's not as out of practice as we may think. It's hidden in symbolism, it's in our collective history, and it is still very much practiced today, whether it's through a foreign way of life, a ritual, or depravity. And sadly, if anyone tries to report it, it does kind of get laughed at or ignored, and it just remains unnoticed. Let's listen to this clip of two children who tried to say something about this.
He kills babies there.
Right.
We eat babies. We drink their blood.
Okay.
Because this is how we do it. So, like, on Wednesdays is the most special, busiest days, special day.
Okay. We'll take it little bit by little bit. So, you say your dad comes to your school every day.
Yes.
What does that mean? He comes to your school every day?
So that means he comes, like, whenever we have school on Saturdays, he comes and sees us there.
Whereabouts does he come and see you?
My school, Christchurch Primary School.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, the area we live next to Christchurch Primary School.
Yeah.
Because we live in 5 Patterson Road, and then after he comes to our school.
Okay. So who drops you off at school in the morning?
My mum.
So you get dropped off at school?
Yes.
When you get dropped off at school, what do you do then?
So then they check if the coast is clear, if my mum's not there or anything around the area. So they go, Mr. Morris, the caretaker.
Yeah.
He goes around the school areas and checks if my mum is there or anything, like if the coast is clear.
Right.
And after they call my dad and say that everything's all right, my mum's not there, it's all clear.
How do you know that?
Because they got the number of my dad.
And how do you know that?
Because I heard them talking to my dad. That was exactly my own dad's voice. Exactly.
So where were you when you heard this caretaker speaking to you?
Staff room.
Why were you in the staff room?
Because that's where they do sex to me. There.
So you've got to...
In that door, and it's just a tiny little room. It's all stuffed with sweets, prizes, especially to pay the children with sweets to do sex to them.
Right.
Yeah, so they give sweets as much as they like.
Yeah.
So they give sweets till they're like full, they're done. So because while they eat the sweets, they do sex to them. So they pay them sweets, and then after they do what they want them to do.
Okay.
Because our children.
What children?
So there's children from our school, 200 children in our school, but it's not like all. Okay. There's 20 special children.
Who are these 20 special children?
There's Millie, she's a brown girl.
Millie who?
Millie Cowell.
Millie Cow?
Yes.
Okay. So how do you know she's one of the 20 special children?
Because I know, because she comes and they do sex to her, mostly.
Who's they?
The teachers, the parents, the staff.
Every single teacher or specific teachers?
No, the whole school does it. The whole school, and we got our own church too. So because they do that, because after, as I said, we kill babies, we drink their blood, we eat them. Okay. But then after so the social services who are in it, so they go to families, so the families can't afford, so they got a baby but they can't look after it or anything. They can't buy food, or they can't buy clothes, they can't look after it. So the families who sell their children.
Yeah.
So the social services get them. They say they get them to a foster home, but they don't. They get the babies or the children, and then they get Miss Marden,
Yeah.
our nurse in our school. She injects the child or baby in the neck just here though.
Right. Okay. And how do you know that?
Because I saw her doing it.
How did you see her doing it?
Because I saw her in the staff room. She was getting this, so she got this injection, and she done it. So the baby was there, just sitting on the table,
Right.
and I was just laughing there. And after she just injected her, and I was I was slowly went to sleep. But not just like a thud, not like just fell straight away. They put, because it looked like it was slowly moving down like that.
Right.
Yeah, so then after
So his baby's gone to sleep.
yes, and then after they get put on this bit, they get the baby, they hang it upside down.
And how's that hanging
yes,
upside
with
down?
the string.
From where?
On the wall, because there's this little like so it is a screw, and they put a string, it's like a circle string,
Yeah.
tie it to the legs, hang it upside down, and then they get the knife they use for cutting the baby's head off. So you know this big ones, like this big Chinese ones,
Yeah.
which you chop up coconut and stuff.
Right.
Yes, they get cleavers, aren't they? No,
Okay.
I don't know what they're called.
You've described it well enough.
Yes.
Right, okay.
So then because our dad, he forces me and Gabriel to do it. But because we can't, we're not strong enough to cut the baby's head off, he has us to hold the knife, and he puts his hand at the top of our hand, and he helps us to cut the baby's head off. Because he's learning, he's teaching me and Gabriel, so when we're older, to do it to our own children and do this kind of stuff to our own children.
Where is it that happens?
The church, the kitchen in our church.
The kitchen in the church.
Yes, they
okay.
got.
So, right, this string.
Babies, and he eats the meat.
Okay, well, let's just talk about in the church and whereabouts in the school.
In the church, there's a seats, and here's a little road, and there's a big,
Okay.
three stairs, it's really big, and then we dance there.
Yeah. So you're dancing. What sort of? Why was you dancing? What music were you listening to?
We don't put music on, but we just dance.
Dance.
Yeah,
Okay.
we put all
Okay,
kind of music songs.
Okay, so you're dancing, and who else was dancing? Any of the children?
Everybody does.
Okay, who says that? Then you said there's a bit where your dad put the brown coloured willy, plastic willy.
No,
in your
but
bum.
my dad doesn't have a brown one.
No? What one?
He's the boss of the whole religion, the whole culture. He's the boss.
And what's this religion called?
It's not called nothing.
It's not called nothing.
No, we eat babies, we kill them, and my dad's and this is what my dad tells us to do. Look, my dad killed babies, and we help him kill babies because our dad forces us to.
Okay.
But we never kill babies, never on our own, never.
Okay. So, what? After 6 hours, the party's finished.
Yeah.
And where did you go? What? After the party, where did you go then?
Back to our house, to my
Whose
mum's.
house? Your
My
mum's
mum's,
house?
yeah.
Okay.
Because it's home time.
And did you tell her about the black willy going in your bum?
She's scared. If they find out, they'll hurt me.
Who killed the babies?
Papa!
And what, he gets you to help him?
Yes.
Shoot.
So he tells us to hold the hand on the knife, and then he holds his hand on our hand. So then he cuts the baby's head off. And we dance with the skulls.
You what?
We dance with the skulls in a church.
Now, this was called a hoax. This happened back in 2015. It was said the claims were made against their dad. They were forced by their mom to do this. And I don't know, Mary, these kids, very specific and convincing.
I heard that years ago when it first came out, and never once in my mind did I think that was fake. As I was watching them, I remember thinking that they're just so matter of fact. Like, this is just how life is. What do you mean? I feel like that was covered up by saying it was a hoax. And then we have that model who back in 2009 appeared distraught in a hotel in Mexico. She was captured on video screaming that the global elites and influential figures were involved in ritual killing and eating people. I think her name was Gabriela Rico Jimenez. Now, she disappeared from public view right after she was filmed totally distraught running out of this hotel. And we'd play the clip, but it's in Spanish and I don't really speak Spanish. But she was, detained by police, and then she was remanded to a psychiatric facility and then released. And then her family made a missing persons case for her because she was released but never came home. But they later pulled that missing persons case. And since that date, since that distraughtness in front of that hotel screaming that they were eating people, she has never been seen again.
I actually forgot about that young lady in front of that hotel. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a good one to study if any of our listeners want to look into that. They really do a good job of debunking and hiding their tracks. I mean, just a little disinformation becomes enough to deny an entire truth. It's so sad. But let's camp right here for a bit on cannibalism. While cannibalism is mostly frowned upon for very good reasons, right? It does tie back to our blood rituals. Many historical instances involved endocannibalism, and that is eating members of one's own group. And that was for religious, magical, or funerary rites. We also have the eating of enemies, which is exocannibalism. And this was sometimes a tactic to intimidate rivals or absorb their power. It's seen in places like Borneo and China, the Vikings. And warriors would do this. The Aztecs were famous for human sacrifice, and to them, cannibalism was a significant part of their religious practice, where victims, often war captives, they were bled and their hearts were offered to deities. The flesh of the sacrifice was sometimes consumed by nobles to gain the tenali or the life force. In ancient, medieval, and early modern Europe, probably here in the US too, human body parts, including blood, flesh, and ground mummies, were widely sold and consumed as remedies for various ailments like epilepsy, bruising, and rheumatism. And remember, we talked about Elizabeth Bathory and her tubs of blood and her epilepsy. Is that a coincidence? But get this, fresh human blood, particularly from executed criminals, was considered potent due to the belief that the soul or life force remained within it. And in Rome, when a gladiator would fall, the arena would overrun with spectators collecting the warm blood for their strength. And this one is really wild. Have you wondered where the mummies from these tombs found in the 1800s? Well, they ate them in the Victorian times. It was wildly popular. And everything we've talked about is fascinating and twisted, but let's start tying this all together. Even religion today, especially the Christian religion, it has symbolic forms of blood rituals or atonements. And I know people may come at me, but what is the Eucharist or communion to the Christian faith? The Eucharist is a holy sacrament. It was instituted by Jesus at the Last Supper, wherein the bread and the wine become the real presence of Christ's body and blood to renew his sacrifice. And he commanded his followers to drink and eat and to do it in remembrance of him and his sacrifice. That is a blood sacrifice.
And let's just clarify that a little. As a Christian, your belief acknowledges that there is power in the blood of Jesus. Christians invoke the shed blood of Jesus Christ through prayers to claim divine protection, healing, deliverance, and victory over evil, right? The Christian faith stands firm that in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace. So, partaking in Holy Communion, this symbolic drinking of Christ's blood and the eating of his body, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins, is done in reverence and remembrance of Christ for his sacrifice and his resurrection. Christ's blood covers the redeemed, seals them as his own. Jesus shed his blood. So, unlike all other blood rituals, no more blood is required. The need for blood atonement was finished up there on that cross. Grace and love won. But in this fallen world where lies and deceit rule, blood is still traded, demanded, and paid.
Yes, that is the distinction with the believers and the followers of Christ. There's no further need for bloodshed. Christ was all that was needed. And that is in contrast to some religions that still practice animal sacrifice today. Islam, Hindu, Santeria, Voodoo, Armenian Orthodox. I mean, there's numerous others. Even the Jewish were ready to sacrifice a red heifer. They've been waiting for 2,000 years. And in July of 2025, they almost did, but there were 2 black hairs that were found on the heifer, and it made it unworthy.
They were so close. But that sacrifice, it needs to be pure for them to do it. But let's back up to that Christian faith. Christ was blameless and pure, and that is the distinction. All other blood atonements and sacrifices are no longer asked for or even needed. Christ stopped it all. So all these other forms outside of symbolism, outside the symbolism of communion, and we won't get into the whole Catholic thing with that, but they get their own episode someday. We'll do that. But anything else, it's made to false deities, powers, or it's done under a deception, under a lie, and maybe even done for a darker reason. Now, if we look a little closer at Islam, to their sacrifice. I just want to say this. These sacrifices aren't just happening in another country. I want to make this very clear. Their animal sacrifices are during the Eid al-Adha, and I apologize if I said that wrong. Here in the United States, it's 100% legal for them to do those. And it's celebrated over 4 days and it's encouraged. And this festival is a remembrance of the prophet Ibrahim's obedience to God to sacrifice his son Ishmael. Now, I could say more about Islam, but I won't, not today. But it's not just Islam. Like we said, it's so many more religions, or maybe what most would call dark occult religions and Wicca. Modern religion, almost every religion, has or has had a form of blood ritual in them. Look at the Mormons with the Church of the LDS. They say they did not encourage blood atonement. And I mean, when I say that, I mean the killing of people. But blood atonement is to kill a person to save their soul. But Joseph Smith did encourage this. blood for blood according to the law of heaven. Joseph Smith taught that there are certain sins so grievous that man may commit that they would place the transgressor beyond the power of the atonement of Christ. And if these offenses are committed, then the blood of Christ would not cleanse them from their sins, even if they repented. Therefore, their only hope was to have their blood shed to atone as far as possible in their behalf. And this is scriptural doctrine from the Mormons, and it's taught in all the standards of work of the church. Now, that comes from the Doctrines of Salvation, Volume 1, pages 135 through 136 of 1954, if anybody out there wants to look it up. And that is dangerous doctrine. Christ's sacrifice covers all sins. This is not even something that's needed. But people would kill themselves if they committed a grievous sin, or other family members of the church would just go ahead and murder them. They'd just be like, you did this. You need to die. You need a blood atonement. And they would just do that as an excuse for murder. And they would also use blood atonement to slay outsiders.
The Mormon religion is just full of seemingly occult type practices, at least in the beginning of the religion. And even back in the treasure digging days, they were encouraged to kill their dogs. And especially if you had a pure white dog, you would kill the dog, cite an incantation, bury a knife to find a treasure. Now they say that was not part of the Mormon doctrine, but it was done, as well as symbolic throat cutting and gut spilling gestures made during penalties. Now, I don't know about you, Mary, but I don't want to go to any church that's going to tell me to cut my own throat. That's wild. The gestures were made while you recited. So, gesture at the throat, and then it would read, "Should I do so, reveal any of the secrets. I agree that my throat may be cut from ear to ear and my tongue torn out by its roots." Then you'd move to the heart, and then it would read, "Should we do so, we agree that our breasts may be torn open, our hearts and vitals torn out, and given to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field," and so on. Now the Mormons did this until the 1990s, when they got rid of the penalties. But like all religions, there are always factions that linger, right? But let's recap a little. We've talked about a lot. So, blood, from a scientific view, we could say there are arguments that could be made that drinking blood of another, especially if it is a younger person, or injecting that blood, it has benefits like youth, health, increased stamina, and vitality. This new scientific research is trying to legitimize or mirror something that we feel is the darker practice of blood drinking. As we know, blood is life. Blood is also the established currency in the spirit world. It atones for sins and wrongs. It buys favor from gods, demons, whatever. You can insert some darker being there. It's not just dark religions or darker spiritual occult practices that ask for blood in rituals, magic, or atonements. Some religions, they do it purely symbolically. Blood is big business. And the final business, you could say, blood and the soul are 100% linked. So, what about these darker rituals? Aside from depravity and vanity for one's own self, what are these darker rituals? Now, we haven't gotten to those yet, but let's walk through some early examples and even modern types of blood rituals.
If we look to the Bible, we learn about at least two gods that people sacrificed their children to, and that would be Moloch and Baal. Now, these were terrible gods. If you read in Leviticus 18:21, "You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Moloch, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." Here you have God strictly commanding the Israelites not to allow their children to pass through the fire of Moloch, declaring it a profanity against his name, with the penalty of death by stoning. There are a few interesting things about the scripture. The first is it's kind of casually put in there. God is laying down some rules and he's going over sexual sins and perversions that they should not engage in. And right there in the middle of saying that, he also says, oh, and don't give your kids to Moloch. And then he goes on about talking about the sexual things they shouldn't do. So it's weird, right? And so it was either put in the wrong order by translations or maybe it was on purpose. So child sacrifice would have been a convenient way to get rid of a child born out of wedlock, to hide that shame. And, you had the added bonus of offering it up to a god. And in today's modern age, we wouldn't know anything about the link between sex and unwanted children and getting rid of them, would we? Maybe it's labeled as something different. I just kind of wanted to make sure that that was a distinction to point out.
Sad, but these gods, they were just horrible. And let me point out, when they sacrificed to Molech and Baal, it was done very specifically. Now, these idols were massive, and most of them were made from copper or bronze, and they had, there were holes in the bellies, and then the idol had these outstretched arms. Okay. People would start a fire in the bellies or at the feet of the idols. And when the arms would get red hot, that is when they would place the children on their arms or place them in the opening in the belly where that fire is. And these people would burn their children alive. And to add to that scene, they would beat these drums and they would just keep beating them louder and louder so the parents or the mothers couldn't hear the screams of their children. These weren't just newborns, sometimes they were older children.
Absolutely horrifying and just horrific. In those earlier times, many religious traditions, particularly within Christianity, shunned drums because they associated them with pagan rituals. Drums are used wildly in the occult and dark spiritual practices, but to give authenticity to these child sacrifice claims, because you'll read that and people will still be like, yeah, there's no way. They didn't do that. But in Carthage recently, they uncovered thousands of urns containing the cremated remains of infants and young children, along with inscriptions to the gods. Now, they link these with sacrifices to Moloch or Cronus, and while that's still debated, the inscriptions on the urns bear the mark of Baal Haman. Let me just make a side note to Moloch. That may not have been a god, but it may have been a type of sacrifice, specifically a child sacrifice. And so, if that's the case, then it could have been done to just about any god. But Baal Haman was one related to child sacrifice that's very well established, and Kronos, Chemosh, several other gods, always demanding human sacrifice. The devil cannot mimic the blood of Christ, so he tries through so many forms of sacrifice to perverse that. And in the Epstein files, he had his bank account was called Baal. So that's kind of interesting.
Very interesting. There's no higher currency than blood of the lamb, and the bigger the ask, the bigger the sacrifice. Remember, a newborn human baby only has 1 cup of blood. So if a lot of blood is required, many parents offered them up. And children are specifically sacrificed for a few reasons. And the first is because of the innocence and purity in their little soul. And second, it would have been to test the extreme devotion of the parent to the God, giving up your child. And like you said, Mary, for a taunt to God who abhors it. What bigger sign of devotion is there than kill a child? And please, listeners, make no mistake. We still have these blood sacrifices going on today. There may no longer be a giant bronze idol, but blood is still being shed, and sometimes a life is being exchanged. Blood, again, it's traded for power, for health, for youth, for self, and sometimes knowingly to dark spiritual entities, and unknowingly, that is a slippery and scary thought. So, if we view blood as more than just a youth giving elixir and start viewing it as currency, that is why pure animals and innocent blood are sought. It is high in value, it is sacred, right? But child sacrifice is not always needed for blood rituals. Animals, again, are sometimes used. Let's look back at the Old Testament, where there were plagues of Egypt, specifically the 10th plague. Now, that's the death of every firstborn human and animal in Egypt. Now, to be spared, lamb's blood was placed on the doorposts, but in a specific way and with a specific application. Israelites were instructed to dip a branch of hyssop into the blood and apply it to the top beam and the two side posts of the door frames. And if it was done properly, the angel of the Lord would not enter that home, and the firstborn was spared. So, again, blood rituals have rules. You can't just get some blood and say a prayer. There are usually specific rites or chants, tools, and meticulous methods. So don't be cutting yourself and drinking, your blood out there. There are rules when dealing with blood trades. Let's look at a small one you may have done yourself. Mary, do you remember being younger and people having blood brothers? Were you ever a blood brother with anyone, Mary?
I think I was with my childhood bestie. I think we did that, just a little pinprick in our spit or something. I don't remember. But with my little brother, we absolutely did it. And so it was just something we did. I think we saw it on the Andrew Griffith show. How about that? What about you? Did you ever do that?
I never did partake in that, but that seemingly innocent act of mixing our blood or ingestion of blood between parties, that creates a binding, a sacred, and it's a sacred bond, and it's supposed to symbolize shared life or death. And till death, that was part of the oath, you would say. And for anyone who doesn't know what a blood brother oath is, you would prick or cut your finger or hand, and then you would hold each other's you'd hold each other's hand and mix the blood, of the wound, kind of mingling the blood, letting their blood enter yours and yours into theirs. And honestly, that's part of why sex is so sacred. You are bonding yourself to that person and exchanging those bodily fluids. And it's also why sex and blood magic are often intertwined. But that simple little thing that binds you to someone, and I think you said it earlier, Mary, blood magic is the hardest to remove because it's a soul tie.
Yeah. And blood magic can even be simpler than that, if you can believe it. If you go to a person who does tarot, not someone who bought a deck at Barnes and Noble because it was fun and then was like, oh, I'm a tarot reader now, but a real one, they would have imbued their deck with their own blood. And if it was an heirloom deck, the blood of all of its previous owners would be on that. And that would make it a strong bond between the reader of the deck. And it would make that deck incredibly powerful. And a deck that came from the same line of readers, that would be super powerful. And actually, it's incredibly rare. And just a little side note, people who buy their own tarot decks, that doesn't work. Tarot decks are given to you, they're gifted to you. So I used to do tarot and I had marked my deck with my blood. When I discovered I shouldn't be into witchcraft, I destroyed my deck and I let it all go. But that's something maybe we can do later, focus on witchcraft. But sigil magic, that works very much the same way. You create a sigil, you focus on it for whatever it is you're wanting to manifest or control. And to connect with that sigil, you add a drop of your own blood, and then you would burn this sigil. And you would burn it because that meant that you were just leaving it up to the spirit realm to manifest it for you, to make that come to life, or you would leave it on your altar. And so you bonded your blood to something very unknown. And I think people don't look deeper into why we do things or deeper into claims that something is being done. Our collective and individual ignorance is leading to our mutual destruction and moral decline. People just don't believe in this stuff. And I'm telling you, it is 1,000,000,000% real. Stay away from it.
I couldn't have said that better myself. So bloodletting, blood atonement, child sacrifice, blood magic. No one actually holds rituals and gives children up for a sacrifice nowadays. Or do they? I don't know. Like you said, it's all in the movies and made up. No one does that. But are we sure? Again, they're telling us in the movies. They're telling us in the songs. If the Epstein files have done anything, they should make everyone more aware that human depravity and dark rituals are still being done today. Uh, back to Molech or Baal. Any dark god or secret society doesn't need belief in them. They only need participation. And we participate when we do nothing. And if there is a chance that a child sacrifice is really happening, but shrouded in darkness, shouldn't we rally to investigate and hold people accountable? What if it was your child? What if it was your neighbor's child? We are called to have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather to expose them. And perhaps being a light in the world is not only to lead people to Jesus, but to help expose the evils happening all around us. And a good start, you could call your state representative, your senator, your attorney general, governors. You make noise. There's an old saying, Mary, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So you gotta, all of our listeners, watch the children in your neighborhood. Even if you don't have small kids, watch for your neighbors' kids. Look out for them. Don't just keep your head down anymore. We have to be observant.
I hope I'm wrong, but our government will probably do nothing about the Epstein files. And as more is uncovered, it will probably just keep getting darker. Just look at all the rituals around us with Bohemian Grove, the Illuminati, the Finders. That's a fun rabbit hole. But every day it becomes clearer that the world is run by those who operate outside moral society. I know people think Haley and I are off our rockers with some of the things we talk about. But remember, a conspiracy theory is only a theory until it's proven true. And in a lot of ways, the Epstein files prove so much of this super dark stuff. But the only sacrifice that we should focus on is the one God provided. Jesus died to save us from a world stuck in evil. He died for you. He saw you. He knows you. He stayed on that cross for you. Jesus taught us that the only way to the Father and the kingdom of heaven is by confessing your sins and believing in him. His blood redeems the lost. And that, my friends, is the real blood sacrifice and the final blood sacrifice. Even if you've done any part of a blood ritual, Christ's blood trumps it all. So take heart.
Our point is the world is hard and it can be dark, but you do not have to carry that darkness around with you. Hope is not lost. And with that, we hope you aren't rocking back and forth too hard after this heavy episode. And as always, if you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. And find us and follow us on our social media for some really insane images and side notes that we're going to include for this episode. And as always, keep it weird and pull it back to Jesus.
let's go back a couple of steps. Adrenochrome is adrenalized blood. It is developed when an individual is in a deep state of terror. Adrenaline pumps through the blood, and then they drain that blood from the person, and that's a drug. It's the drug of choice. It is produced on an industrial scale. Walmart uses its supply chain to transport around the world. It's transported in 44-gallon drums, say out of Holland. Now, how many babies do you have to kill and torture to get a 44-gallon drum? Right. So what do you do with the bodies after that? Wow, just put them into the McDonald's bins. In the US. This is the US. I don't know about odds, but definitely the US.